Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second episode in this conversation series celebrating International Coaching Week as we get together and reimagine the future. If this is your first time meeting us, my name is Meenakshi Iyer, and I'm the founder and principal of North Star Solutions and Services, which is a boutique future work-oriented coaching, training, and consulting practice. And we specialize in working with mid-career professionals, particularly in the technology space, in supporting them on their leadership development journeys. And today I'm here with Kim Meninger, dear friend and fellow coach. Kim Meninger is based outside of the Boston area in the US. And Kim is a women's leadership coach and consultant, and in that role, she has coached hundreds of clients whose primary focus on building confidence and managing self-doubt to accelerate their career paths. And Kim also works primarily with women in the technology, biotech, pharma, and financial services spaces. She's a speaker. She is a podcast host, and her podcast is called Impostor Syndrome Files. And Kim is really passionate about empowering women and others who have been traditionally marginalized or disenfranchised to build their confidence, because Kim believes that embracing our unique value is foundational to achieving true diversity and inclusion. And so one of the other things that Kim also does is she serves on leadership boards of several organizations that specifically work in the space of empowering women in the workplace. And I've had the pleasure of meeting Kim through common friends and via LinkedIn, really. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, and it's been such a pleasure getting to know you and collaborating with you, Kim. And thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Oh, thank you, Meenakshi. It is truly my pleasure. And it is always a great privilege to have a chance to talk with you.
Likewise. And, I'd like to kick off this conversation with really how you came about with naming your practice, Your Career Success.
Well, it's interesting because that was agonizing for me to think about a name. I really never consider myself to be a creative person. I can write a whole article, but to title it is the hardest part. And so it's really hard for me. And for a long time, and actually the LLC is Executive Career Success. And I used that term aspirationally, but what I found was that it was alienating to people who didn't define themselves in that way.
Mm.
I wanted to create a more inclusive name. And so what I decided to do was to change that from Executive Career Success to Your Career Success, so that everybody who wanted to take advantage of my services could see themselves in that title.
Mm. That is so insightful, and I love how you sort of did your own little inspect and adapt cycle over there to do that. That's fantastic. So in that context, what role do you see professional coaching play, especially for women in the workplace?
Well, I've been on an emotional roller coaster ride for years as it relates to progress around diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. And while we've certainly come a significant way, as compared to years ago, there's still much progress that needs to be made. And unfortunately, I believe that women don't have the same access to organic networks and support resources that men do. Mm-hmm. And that's not necessarily a nefarious thing. I think that leadership, executive leadership in particular, still tends to be dominated by men in many industries. Mm-hmm. And a more senior man is likely to see himself in an up and coming male leader and take him under his wing and kind of show him the ropes and teach him the unwritten rules of the organization. And so there's a benefit there that women don't necessarily have as much access to just by virtue of our gender. And so I see coaching as an opportunity to fill some of that gap, to create a safe space for women to have honest conversations and get some clarity. And also from a confidence perspective, to recognize that a lot of the challenges that we face in the workplace are not our issues. Unfortunately, what I see a lot with women is we internalize the challenges internalize the experience and start to think there must be something wrong with me. What's wrong with me? I'm doing it wrong. When in actuality, it's a function of the system that we belong to that we're still trying to navigate. And so I think coaching can help shed some light on that and hopefully help us to avoid, over accountability for some of the challenges that we face.
I remember you sharing that earlier in one of our previous conversations as well, Kim, where you said diversity is not that's not a problem to fix. Like we are not the problem to fix, right? That's what is coming to mind. And I also really found it insightful how you called out like senior leaders who are male may see more of themselves in other men as opposed to, and that creating a sort of a barrier for women in terms of access. I hadn't thought about that before in that context. So this actually alludes to the next question that I had is, what might be some other barriers for women in accessing coaching as an avenue for professional and personal development?
So I think we're in a place right now where coaching is becoming much more democratized through some of the bigger coaching companies, let's say, Better Up and those types of companies. And I think that creates more opportunity for people at lower levels of the organization, maybe high potentials, people who are first-time managers, to get access to coaching when they otherwise might not have. I certainly remember back in my corporate days, it seemed that only the top level got access to executive coaching. And because senior levels tend to still be dominated by men, most of the coaching still seems to be given to men at that level. And so I think that, while we're on that journey, it's still not true for everybody. So a lot of times what's happening is that women are put in a position where they have to finance their own coaching, and that might not necessarily be an investment that they have the budget to make, and especially in the earlier stages of their career. And philosophically, and this is just my bias, I think it's more important to provide coaching in the earlier stages of a career than it is to once you've already reached the C-suite. And not to say that there isn't benefit to having coaching at the C-suite level, but I think there's so much that we can learn about ourselves and how to navigate these leadership challenges more effectively if we start early.
Could not agree with you more. And I think that once we have experience, once anyone has experienced the impact of coaching or being in a coaching conversation and how it helps you rethink, reframe perspectives, the earlier you start, the more it becomes a part of who you are as you continue to grow into more senior leadership roles.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I also appreciate you calling out the financial accessibility piece, and I was just thinking that to begin with, most of the times women earn less than men for the same jobs, and that's still true in many parts of the world. And also, depending on where you come from, women might also face additional barriers in terms of, even if they make the money, they may not have 100% independence on how they spend the money that they earn. Right? So making decisions on where to, and as far as coaching is concerned, in my book, it's not even an expenditure, it's actually an investment. And so actually, let me ask you this. So in your experience in working with primarily women in the workplace, what other barriers do you see that we as women might be bringing to the table ourselves?
Ooh, that's a really good question. So I think that we do over personalize, and of course I'm stereotyping here, but I do think that we sometimes over personalize interactions in the workplace in ways that men do not. And I think that's probably a function of social conditioning as well. We are conditioned to always be thinking of others, to take care of others. And so a lot of times when we are in, let's say, conflict situations, it's more difficult for us to advocate for ourselves because we are thinking about the other person. For example, I can't tell you how many times I've talked with women at the most senior levels who have such hesitation around asking for a raise, around asking for compensation that they know they deserve because it's market value, or because they know they have the data to support that this is a fair rate, and they are afraid to ask for it. And it's interesting because I often think, based on the language that women use when they tell me about their hesitations, I get the sense sometimes that they feel like they are asking their boss to open their wallet and give them money right out of their own pocket, right? It's not a business. It's not something that we think of as coming out of this very large business budget, and that this is a function of our value and impact, but that it's somehow a personal favor that we're asking of somebody. And so I think the fact that we personalize in that way can get in the way of advocating for ourselves in many types of situations. And that undermines our confidence, it undermines our presence, which can also get in the way, obviously, of our ability to advance to higher levels.
That's a great point, and it reminded me of times where I've found myself in that situation. And I can definitely say that as a solopreneur, when I do pricing for my services, that emerged in a peer coaching conversation that I had. That for me, pricing out my services, and when I was having money conversations with my potential clients, it was like as if I was asking for money for myself, as opposed to in return for my services,
Yes.
And that was one of the most impactful coaching conversations I remember having as a client. So I was working with my peer coach on that. And yeah, that's what reminded me when you shared that example.
Yeah, it's such a great point. I think we all feel that way to some extent. And I'll say this is another example of where it's very complicated, because we may, based on this conversation, the interpretation may be, well, then women just need to toughen up, or women need to change, and then everything will get better. And this is when we talk about women aren't the problem to be fixed, because this is a systemic issue, and there are structural changes that would make the system fairer for everybody. And I think that, when we talk about things like inclusion, recognizing that not just women, but people of all kinds of cultural backgrounds with different values and different roots would have trouble navigating a system that requires that, we game this compensation conversation, as opposed to just being more transparent and fair about what's possible and what the process looks like.
Absolutely. So, carrying this forward, in your experience, how has professional coaching evolved in the past few years, to support individuals and women professionals and leaders in scenarios like this? So how do you think professional coaching has evolved in that context?
Well, I think that, going back to the democratization piece, I think that has certainly changed things, because there's definitely greater access. And because there's greater access, I think there's also greater respect and appreciation for what coaching can offer to people at all levels of an organization. And so that has changed the game a bit. I also think the pandemic has changed how we think about the professional in the workplace. And my hope is that we are looking at individuals through a more holistic lens, and that, as a leadership coach, I am never looking at someone independent of their full life, right? But yes. I think sometimes, especially if you're coaching for an organization, there's an expectation that you're very laser focused on specific aspects of that person's work or their role, and not necessarily broadening the aperture to include other areas of their lives. And so my hope is that that is changing now, that we're recognizing that we are three-dimensional humans that our lives influence our work and our work influences our lives, and that there's benefit to providing support to people in that holistic fashion, because we are better workers when we are stronger people. And that's just a fact.
Wow, I love that. We are better workers. I'm actually writing that down. When we are stronger people. Yeah, so true.
Yeah, I mean, one other point I would add there too, in terms of how it's changed, is that when I first started coaching 10 years ago, I felt like there was a lot more shame around coaching. People were less willing to admit that they had a coach, especially if they got a coach through their organization, because it felt punitive in some way, that they felt like, oh, well, I have a coach because I'm not doing it right and I need someone to help me fix it. And so, yeah, so there was definitely this reluctance to talk about it and to admit, quote unquote, like to confess that you have a coach. And now I see it almost in the same way that we talk, you hear people all the time just talking about their therapists, and there's no shame as there would have been years ago. And so I think that's the same thing with coaching, is people recognize this isn't punitive. It's not something that is an indication that you have some major flaw, but that it's an investment in your growth and development as a professional. And that's something to be proud of, not something to hide.
So true. This came up in my last conversation with Priya Ramesh as well, and she shared the same experience with organizations, that in the past, or until a few years ago, organizations used to set up coaching as an intervention, and people were selected to go through it, so or nominated for it. And a lot of times it could go either way. Either you were considered high potential and that's why you were in that, but then it's a reward, or something is wrong with you and that's why you need to go through coaching to get fixed. And that's the thing, right? That coaching really, and I go back to the TED Talk by Dr. Atul Gawande, one of the TED Talks where he talks about the power of coaching and how he experienced that in the operating room. Where he was at a point where he was a skeptic going in, having his old mentor come in and watch him in the operating room. And then when he got the feedback, he realized the value of everybody having a coach. And that's what this reminds me of. And I think that that's definitely an evolution. And one of the other things that Priya alluded to was individuals are seeking out coaching as well, more and more.
Yes.
Do you see that in your experience as well?
I do. And what's interesting is that I will often ask, is this something that you are, if the individual comes to me, is this something that you are planning to finance, or are you looking for support from your organization? And a lot of times what they'll tell me is, no, I want to do this on my own because I don't want my manager involved. Whether that's because they don't want their manager dictating the agenda, so to speak, or they have concerns about privacy, which we all, that with an ethical coach should never be an issue. But I think there is this sometimes a motivation to separate the coaching experience from their work. And I've actually seen that far more often than not with the individuals I work with.
That's very encouraging to know as well, right? That individuals feel empowered to do that and go seek out a coach. Yeah. So in that context, the next question I have for you is, how do you see coaching play a role in the future, and especially how the future of work is evolving and continues to evolve?
Well, I think that anytime we are in a state of uncertainty, which is constant nowadays, right? There's just very little stability. There's the benefit to having coaching support. And so I don't think we're going to know what the steady state, if we ever reach a steady state, is going to look like for some time, right? Every time we think we've stabilized, something else comes into the mix that reminds us that we still have a ways to go. And so I think particularly as we sort through what is a priority and how to learn the lessons from the last couple of years, it will be really helpful to have coaches that are outside of the system, aren't attached to the outcome, who can help to facilitate that process. And as I mentioned before, I think it's also going to be really valuable to have people who can support individuals at a holistic level and not just at a very thin slice of their professional development. And so my hope is that organizations will continue to move in the direction of better respecting the human at the center of the workplace and not just the worker, and that will create more opportunity for people to have coaches as well.
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. And to me, it's such a forward-thinking view and very inspiring to think about it in that way. I do want to ask you though, everything that you shared made me think of this. What is coaching to you? What does it mean to you as a coach?
That's a good question. It's so interesting because what I often say in terms of my why is that I am coaching myself 15 years ago. I am striving to be the resource to women that I did not have when I was working in a very political, very aggressive, male-dominated culture. And so to me, coaching is about creating space for people to process their experience, to be able to ask questions and sort out what is my opportunity versus what's a systemic issue. And to, really, I come from the lens of self-empowerment. So there's a lot of discussion about systems and macro level challenges. But at the end of the day, where I see the greatest opportunity as a coach is to really encourage people to focus on what's within your control. What are you empowered to change or to manage more effectively? And always know, if nothing else, you have the power to leave. And I think sometimes women have a sense, whether it's social conditioning or just the fact that we have a lot of other personal responsibilities, we often feel like we don't have choices, that we should be grateful for the job we have, that we need to make it work. And if that's our attitude, we will tolerate a lot more disrespect than we deserve. And so to really encourage women to think about the fact that you have value, you are somebody that, they benefit from. This is not them doing you a favor, right? And to really always raise your consciousness around that so that you know that you have choices. And so that's the lens that I bring to coaching and the ultimate impact that I want to have.
That's fantastic. And what stayed with me is how you shared your perspective as coaching is the space to process one's experience. And I was thinking about it, and it's like a space to re-examine and ask questions of oneself as well, right? In that process.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what would be your message to aspiring coaches?
Ooh, that's another good question. Coaching, well, I'll just back up for a minute and say that one of the questions I asked when I was thinking about becoming a coach, and this was over 10 years ago now, is there room for another coach? Right? Because coaching has always felt like a very crowded space to me. But I really, truly believe that there is enough work to go around if you know your purpose, if you know what your motivation is for wanting to become a coach. And that can be challenging because I can remember the days when they would say, you have to pick your niche and you have to focus, and it felt overwhelming and it felt like a lot of pressure. But that was the game changer for me, as soon as I really connected with who am I here to serve? What are the challenges I want to address? Everything fell into place. So I think it's easy to think, oh, I like to mentor, I'll become a coach, or, oh, that seems like a flexible career path, I'll become a coach. Really, don't do it unless you really, truly believe in coaching and know who you want to serve.
That is very powerful. And the question you asked, is there space for another coach? That's a really thought-provoking one. And I share your perspective on that, in that knowing who you want to serve and what's the best value you can bring to which demographic or what kind of people, knowing that. Since you talked about niche, I want to ask you, what does it look like on the other side when folks are looking for coaches? What do you think they need to focus on?
It's a good question, because I think as coaches, we often focus a lot on what level of certification do you have, and all of these things that are so esoteric that I don't think individuals that are looking for coaches would even know to ask, what's the difference between an ACC and a PCC? Right? I don't think anybody knows that. I think what really is important, if I'm the person who's looking for a coach, let's say, it's about genuinely believing that you understand me and my experience, and that I can trust you, that I feel like I can open up to you in ways that I may never have opened up to anyone else. I mean, I do not take for granted what my clients share with me and how vulnerable they are, and that needs to happen in a very trusted relationship. So certainly there are the basics of, do you have coaching skills and do you have credibility as a coach? But beyond that, I think it's really the fit and just assessing, is this a person that I can go deeper in conversation with than I may with my own spouse or some of my own friends?
Right. That is powerful as well. And it is, you'll see once the conversation series is published that what Priya shared in response to this was very similar. And it's interesting for me to be on this other side and hear some of the same things and see the pattern emerge. So it's absolutely fabulous. As we wrap up this conversation, Kim, what are your parting thoughts on this concept of reimagine the future?
Well, the thing I think most about right now is the opportunity to invest more in leaders, because I don't think leaders in organizations have been given proper training and support for the, the monumental task that they have ahead of them. And so I really hope that organizations are considering coaching as a resource to help them transform the definition of leadership within their organization, because leaders historically have been taskmasters, and right now they have to be a combination of social worker and all kinds of different support resources. And if you have selected a leader based on their ability to manage tasks, they're not necessarily capable of being the leader that you need them to be. And I think coaching is going to be a great resource to help organizations move in the direction that the employee base is demanding. It's not even optional anymore. So I think it's going to be really interesting to pay attention to what happens over the next couple of years and beyond. And I hope we can be part of that solution.
Absolutely. So well said. And it goes back to one of the things you originally stated about why you believe that working, supporting emerging leaders and with coaching is so important, so that they grow with it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I love how you tied that back. Great. Well, thank you so much, Kim. Thank you once again for your time and for sharing your wisdom with us. And I look forward to having more conversations with you on this. Thank you.
I do too, Meenakshi. Thank you for the thoughtful questions. And I know it's a conversation that will be ongoing. So look forward to the next round.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kim.